Adam Vaughan, Ward 20, Trinity Spadina. Ms. Councillor Vaughan. Welcome. This round of question, Councillor Vaughan, is from the government side, and you have 15 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, and nice to see many of you again. Hello. As you are aware, I'm a city councillor from the City of Toronto, and that carries with it quite the reputation sometimes. We're quite often told we're not the center of the universe and we shouldn't be trying to govern other parts of the province, let alone the country, from a perspective that sees City Hall at the heart of all things that we do. However, the OMB reverses that, and reverses it in a very dramatic way in the neighborhoods that I represent. Before I get into some of the most ridiculous planning policy that has been visited upon the communities I represent, I'd like you to think about the OMB in a completely different way. If it didn't exist, can you imagine trying to create it? Can you imagine a constituent of yours coming up to you in Sudbury saying we have a really serious problem on King Street in Toronto and we need to override the decision of local expertise and the local councillor and the local neighborhood, and we need to appoint somebody from Sudbury to rule and govern the City of Toronto to make sure they make the right decision on planning issues affecting a local community? That's the most important thing happening in our neighborhood today. Can you imagine somebody from Kitchener saying, look, we have no hope of realizing or responding to an application by the university to build student housing. We really need somebody from downtown Toronto to figure this out for us. Can you please abdicate your responsibility as a local councillor, remove yourself from the process as a local MPP, and appoint somebody from a neighborhood that hasn't even been to Kitchener to come in and reside and decide over what should happen in Kitchener as it tries to deal with an expanding university? Can you imagine selling that politically in the areas that you represent? Sustaining the OMB as a governing agent over planning in Toronto is exactly what you do when you ignore this member's bill. And it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. As a rational planning body, I can show you projects that have come in front of the OMB 2 or 3 times, been refused 2 or 3 times, and then come back a 4th time only to be approved. If it's a rational, evidence-based planning body that's supposed to govern according to the conditions and the rules set in front of it and make the right decision because council is unable, how can it make a different decision with the same evidence in front of it based on who the panel member is? How does that happen? It just doesn't make sense. And we have countless examples in the ward that I represent of the OMB wading into policy and changing decisions that are being made and arrived at, even by the OMB, without any rationale that's tied to the Planning Act. We've had to go to divisional court, and the best you can hope for at divisional court is to go back to the OMB, back to the very source of the problem. We have a project on King Street, which has come in 3 times now because the developer just can't seem to get it right each time he makes an application. It was refused by planning and by the City Council, and it was approved at the OMB because they liked the architecture. Architecture is not a planning issue. And once you get the approval, you can switch the architect and you still have the planning envelope approved by the OMB in place. Nonetheless, the same project has come back to City Hall and then asked, in the middle of the OMB hearing, came back and asked for another floor. Why? Because if they got the approval for 1 incremental change, a 2nd incremental change would be rational, approachable, maybe even preferable. And no sooner said than the first case went off to divisional court, the second one was at the OMB, and it was approved. And now, we just got an application from the same developer on the same site with the same architect for another set of revisions to further increase the height of a building. It's the 3rd run at this building, and the argument each time in front of the OMB is it's just an incremental change. And the OMB says, yes, it's just an incremental change. If it had come in at the final position instead of the first position, it would not have been incremental, it would have been substantial. And the OMB probably would have refused it. But you've set up a system that allows for repeated approaches incrementally to get what they want, what they can't get with an honest approach to the planning process. That's unacceptable, and it's wrong. And it's a system which is perpetuated by the fact that provincial government continues to impose what can only be described as a colonial approach to planning in Toronto. I'm not asking for Kitchener or for Lake of Bays to be exempt from the OMB. I am asking for the City of Toronto to be. And when we've approached ministers in the past, several ministers in the past, they've all said the same thing to us. They've all said, if you take responsibility as outlined in the City of Toronto Act, we will think about it. So the local appeals body is one of the issues that you've asked us to embrace. It's currently making its way through the system at committee right now as we speak. It's a committee which I should be going back to very shortly. The other issue is a development permit system, also on the books to try and exempt neighborhoods with very specific planning tools from the purview of the OMB. We're doing that. But at the end of the day, as long as it exists, you will have developers do what one is doing in my ward right now, which is file an application, refuse to meet with planning, refuse to meet with the community, refuse to meet with the local councillor, sue the city for enforcement on the site in question, and then go straight to the OMB because after 120 days, that's the right that's been granted to them. It just doesn't make sense. It's not good public policy, it's not good planning, and it doesn't deliver what we need as a city, which is the ability to make decisions, to be able to account for the decisions we make, and to build the city that we know will work. And I, again, leave you with the thought. How many of your constituents have ever walked up to you and said, the porch on Brunswick Avenue is too big. You really have to do something about this if I'm going to vote for you to go to Queen's Park. None of you get those issues. And yet you've set up a system that governs that very question in our neighborhoods. We don't want the OMB. We don't need the OMB. What we need is relief from the OMB, and that's what this member's bill hopes to do. And that's why all of the communities that I represent and most of the city stands right there asking for this opportunity to grow up, take responsibility, become transparent, accountable, and deliver good planning and a better city to all of Ontario. Thanks.
Thank you. You have 8 minutes, according to the clerk. 8 minutes, and starting with Mr. Del Duca.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Vaughan, for being here. So this is the government side first chance to ask questions of you, but we've had a chance to hear from a couple of other witnesses here this morning. So I wanted to, I do appreciate what you said, and frankly, I appreciate what the other folks who've come before you have said as well. But I just wanted to get a sense of, I guess, the proportion or the scale of the concern, because I think by and large what we've heard so far this morning, at least the impression I have, is that this is proportionately a significant problem at the City of Toronto, that there's a great deal of angst around this. And yet, and I'm going to ask you to respond to this in a second, but when I look at some of the information that I was able to I guess find, I've come across messaging or quotes from individuals who I think understand the planning process at the City of Toronto fairly well. And so I just wanted to get a sense of what I'm seeing in their comments versus what we've heard from you today and some of the others that have appeared. And I wonder if you can perhaps react, because I don't know. I don't have a planning background. I don't have a great deal of personal experience when it comes to this stuff. But the current chief planner for the City of Toronto,
I might just say all the more reason for you not to have jurisdiction.
Sure, but then I could also argue that of the 44, there are almost none of you that have any planning experience either. So maybe you shouldn't have the jurisdiction either. Having said that,
day.
Your chief planner, the current chief planner for the City of Toronto, Jennifer Keesmaat, says that, and I quote, "Contrary to what some might believe, the city is not beholden to the OMB," Keesmaat said. "Only 4% of applications end up at the OMB. A vast majority don't." That's your current chief planner. She also said that while she's a firm believer in OMB reform, she feels that doing away with the appeal body is unrealistic because it has an important role to play. So that's the current chief planner. Brendan O'Callaghan, a lawyer at the City of Toronto, June 1st, 2013. "I win over 80% of my hearings at the OMB. I'm pretty happy with the treatment that I get at the board." So I'm just wondering why there's that kind
Sure.
of that kind of.
So the
understand what I'm
80%
asking,
the 80% cost $80,000 a day to reaffirm what the city made as a decision months earlier. And in the interim, community associations have to raise dollars. The development process slows down, waiting for the OMB to kick in. But if 80% of the decisions of the City of Toronto are not overturned by the OMB, why do you need the OMB? The 20% that are overturned have a
But
devastating...
if I can just ask for a clarification, is the issue that, because from your presentation earlier, it seemed to me that the issue was one of we're not in a position to make decisions and we are consistently, constantly overruled by this agency, this group, whether it's a person from Vaughan or Kitchener or Sudbury or whatever the case may be, and yet it would seem that your chief planner is saying that only 4% of all of these matters actually end up at the board.
Let's split out what goes to the OMB and what we win on. We win on the porches 9 times out of 10, apparently 8 times out of 10. Those little decisions shouldn't even go to the OMB. And in fact, the local appeals body, which assumes that those decisions shouldn't go to the OMB, is exactly the direction we're heading at the City of Toronto. So by and large, what you're doing is you're creating, at the cost of millions of dollars to the province, $80,000 a day to the city, thousands of dollars to taxpayers, you're creating a layer of red tape that doesn't change a bloody thing. Now, if you don't have other cost pressures to deal with, tell me about it, because we'd love to get some more transit, some more housing built in this province. But if you're spending millions of dollars to simply rubber stamp what City Council has already decided, certainly that's a waste of money. Certainly that's red tape that's unnecessary, and certainly it's an unnecessary level of review that doesn't really produce any significant change.
So your concern is less about whether or not
so let's now
council
take a look at
decisions are being overruled.
Now let's take a look at the decisions that are overturned, because the bulk of the appeals to the OMB are very minor, and I agree they come out of the Committee of Adjustment, but the significant ones are the ones that do the damage. The significant ones are the ones that overturn secondary plans. The significant ones are the ones that, in creating a precedent, leave us in a position where we can't negotiate with the developers. In the King Spadina area, in the building that I cited that came in at 39 meters, went to 41 meters, went to 44 meters, is now coming back at 51 meters. When we're in a position where we're looking at OMB precedent being set at 51 meters, in a neighborhood we have never approved anything over 36 meters, we're now in a position where the rational decision is if we can fight it at the OMB, we're going to lose. So what we start to do is settle. And the OMB starts to lead us in a direction we don't want to go and put us in a position where we're not managing the growth responsibly. And so what ends up happening is we end up negotiating with ourselves, and to avoid an OMB hearing where you get an even clumsier decision and perhaps even a more irrational decision with no finesse and no recognition of local conditions, you end up settling because you're afraid of going to the OMB. And so do those numbers start to skew in a certain direction? They certainly do.
So you mentioned local appeal tribunals, local appeal bodies.
The local appeals body.
Thank you. So when did the province provide the City of Toronto and all municipalities with that ability?
The City of Toronto Act gave it to the City of Toronto, and then months later, the rest of the province. And there has been...
06? Was it 06?
I believe that's right, yeah.
And any particular reason it's taken more than 8 years now for the City of Toronto to actually move on this?
There was significant resistance at the City of Toronto because of the cost.
Because of the cost?
Because of the cost. And the cost is presented in the current staff report, says it would cost an applicant $6,000 to appeal a Committee of Adjustment decision, which if you're a homeowner looking to put a back porch on your house and you've got neighbors that are contesting it, it's a lot of money for either side to go to the local appeals body. It's a bit of an unfair way to describe the cost. Planning has been very resistant to assume this cost because we're in a position where we have to spend a lot of money at the OMB. We don't have a lot of extra dollars around to spend on things like the local appeals body. I can tell you right now that the previous mayor and the previous council thwarted our attempts to bring it forward. The current chair of planning, the current planning department is moving that agenda forward because we think it's the right way to go.
Any sense how much longer that might take?
It's heading towards committee, I believe, in the summer, and hopefully that'll put us in a position to put it in place. It's something which I support strongly. It's something which I would have put in place in 2006, and in fact moved those motions in my first term at council.
Thank you.
2 more minutes. 2 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Vaughan, you talk about how people being afraid for projects to go forward to the OMB. Therefore, there's an attempt to get people around the table to avoid that.
To capitulate.
To capitulate. But you're saying that it's clumsier and it's not optimal. Can you talk about how we strengthen the voice of the local community associations that will, at the end of the day, be impacted by these developments? What do you see?
When you leave planning decisions in the hands of council, and councillors are elected not by developers but by local neighborhood associations, you have just strengthened the hand of the neighborhood association. When you create accountability, democratically constructed accountability, you strengthen the role and the voice of the citizen. And the way to create strong citizen-led planning is to create a strong city council. And the way you do that is you make city council, like it is in Vancouver, like it is in Montreal, and Chicago, and New York, and Los Angeles, and Boston, and Calgary and Edmonton too, you make planning decisions at City Hall by directly elected officials. You do not hide behind a court system. There are councillors who will say no to anything and wink at the developer and say, go to the OMB. There are councillors who will say yes to everything to avoid the OMB. But what you end up with is blurred lines as to who's making the decision and how to execute a plan. And it works in the opposite direction as well. When we brought in, along Shepherd, a new set of zoning regulations and a secondary plan to pay for transit and operationalize and cover the cost of operating transit on Shepherd, it was immediately repealed by the local community. And as a result of that, what ended up happening is you've ended up with a transit deficit.
Right.
If you could impose a transit plan and planning simultaneously and removed it from appeal and removed it from being tinkered with constantly for political reasons without clear lines of accountability, you may find a way to actually pay for transit as
Thank
an
you.
operating phenomenon in this
Thank you,
province.
Councillor Vaughan. Thank you for your presentation, and we're finished with you. Thank you for the day. Thank you. Our next witness is the Greater Beach